My name is Elijah Vance. I am 70 years old, and for 38 of those years, my daughter Nia was the absolute center of my world. I built my life around her smile. Last night, she stood in my living room holding a lottery ticket worth $125 million, a ticket that I had bought. She and her husband looked at the winning numbers, then they looked at me and they threw me out of my own house into the pouring rain. They thought they had everything. But as I stood on the wet pavement, the cold seeping into my bones, I just smiled. They had forgotten to read the fine print on the back of the ticket, and that fine print was about to cost them everything. Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that a promise is the most valuable thing a man can own. The air in the living room was thick with the smell of old paper-worn fabric and the faint, sweet scent of the gardenias my late wife Loretta used to grow by the window. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that settles into a house over decades. I was sitting in my armchair, the one with the permanent indentation shaped perfectly to my back, its worn leather as familiar as my own skin. On the television, the Powerball announcer's voice was unnaturally cheerful, a slick, polished sound that didn't belong in our quiet world. Nia was perched on the edge of the sofa, her body tense as a coiled spring. She held the small slip of paper in her hand like it was a sacred relic. Her husband Derek stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his knuckles white. He was staring at the screen with a raw hunger I'd seen before, usually when he was looking at a new car or an expensive watch he couldn't afford. The announcer called out the first number, 23. Nia's breath hitched. I felt a small smile touch my lips. That was Loretta's birthday. The second number, 8, the month we were married. A quiet confidence began to build in my chest. Derek's grip on Nia's shoulder tightened. The third and fourth numbers came quickly, 16, 41. My daughter let out a small strangled gasp. Her eyes were wide, darting from the ticket to the screen and back again. The room had gone completely still. Even the old grandfather clock in the hall seemed to be holding its breath. Then came the final white ball, 52, a perfect match. A wave of disbelief washed over the room so thick you could feel it. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the announcer called the red Powerball, 6. Nia looked down at the ticket. Her face was a blank mask of shock. Then slowly her eyes lifted to meet mine. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. And then the dam broke. A scream not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated triumph tore from her throat. Derek roared, pumping his fist in the air. They collapsed into each other's arms, shouting and laughing, the sound echoing off the walls of the small house. $125 million. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. I wasn't thinking about mansions or fancy cars. I was thinking that the leak in the roof could finally be fixed. I was thinking that Nia could finally pay off her student loans and the mountain of credit card debt Derek had accumulated. I was thinking that my daughter, my little girl, would finally be free from worry. A genuine happy smile spread across my face. I had kept my promise to Loretta. Our girl was going to be okay. But then the laughter stopped. It didn't fade away. It was cut off as if a switch had been flipped. I looked up. The expressions on their faces had changed. The joy was gone, replaced by something else, something cold and calculating. Derek looked at me and his smile was no longer one of celebration. It was a sneer. He took a step forward away from Nia as if to create a new team, a team of two. He spoke first, his voice dripping with a condescending tone I had grown to despise. "Well, Elijah," he said, drawing my name out, "looks like we won't be needing your Social Security checks anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. For the last 2 years since I retired from the steel mill, my small monthly check had been the difference between them keeping the lights on and falling behind. I had handed it over without a second thought every single month. I looked at Nia, expecting her to scold him to defend me, but she said nothing. She just stared at me, her eyes as hard as polished stones. Then she spoke, and her voice was a stranger's. It was flat, devoid of any warmth. "Dad," she began, prompted by a sharp look from Derek. "We need the space. We're going to have important guests now. Financial advisors, lawyers. It's time for you to find your own place." The words hung in the air, unreal and monstrous. My own place. I looked around the room at the faded photographs on the mantelpiece. Me and Loretta on our wedding day. Nia as a baby, chubby and smiling in my arms. My own place. I repeated, my voice raspy with disbelief. Nia, this is my house. The house I built with your mother. The floorboards we laid with our own hands. Derek let out a short, ugly laugh. It was a sound of pure contempt. Not anymore, old man, he sneered. You signed the deed over to Nia last year when you had that health scare, remember? The lawyer told you it was a bad idea, but you insisted. It's our house now, legally. The memory slammed into me. The sterile lawyer's office. The pen in my trembling hand after my heart had given me a warning. Nia had cried, saying it was just a formality, a way to make sure that if anything happened to me, she wouldn't have to go through probate court. It was to make things easier, she'd said. I had believed her. I had signed my life's work away out of love, and they were now using that love as a weapon. The shock was so profound, I couldn't even form a response. I just stared at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of the little girl I had raised, the girl who used to fall asleep on my chest, listening to old jazz records. I found nothing. Derek moved with a swift, brutal efficiency. He disappeared into my bedroom and came back a moment later, holding the old canvas duffel bag I used for fishing trips. He threw it at my feet. A few shirts, a pair of worn trousers, and my shaving kit were spilling out of the top. Here are your things, he said, his voice flat and final. We don't need your pennies anymore. Get out. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. I was so stunned I offered no resistance. He pulled me towards the front door. I looked back at Nia one last time. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She was staring intently at the wallpaper, her jaw clenched as if the floral pattern held the secrets of the universe. She was a coward. My daughter was a coward. The door opened and the damp, chilly night air rushed in. Derek shoved me onto the porch and the door slammed shut behind me. The sharp click of the deadbolt locking echoed in the sudden silence. It was a sound of absolute finality, a sound that separated my life into two distinct parts, everything before and whatever was to come now. I stood there on the porch under the dim yellow light, the duffel bag at my feet. A light drizzle began to fall, cold and persistent, soaking through my thin sweater. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing, replaying the last 10 minutes, trying to make sense of the wreckage. But it was no use. Sense had left the building along with love and loyalty. I looked through the window. I could see their silhouettes moving inside, animated and excited. They were already on the phone, their voices loud, their gestures expansive. They were planning their new life in the ruins of mine. The cold rain seeped deeper, and it carried with it the ghosts of the past. I saw Loretta's face, pale and tired on her hospital pillow, her hand frail in mine. "Promise me, Eli," she had whispered, her voice barely audible over the beep of the machines. "Take care of our girl. Always." I had squeezed her hand and knotted my throat too tight with grief to speak. "I promise," I had mouthed. "I promise." I saw myself at the steel mill, the searing heat of the furnace on my face, sweat stinging my eyes. Then I saw myself at my second job, pushing a mop down the long, empty hallways of an office building at 2 a.m, my back screaming in protest. All of it, every single exhausting hour, had been for Nia's college tuition, so she could have a life better than mine. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, remembering the day I sold my John Coltrane collection. Those records were my only luxury, my connection to a younger, more carefree version of myself. I sold them to a collector for a fraction of their worth to help Derek pay off a gambling debt he had sworn was a one-time mistake. I had done it to protect Nia from stress, to keep her world stable. Each memory was a fresh stab of betrayal. Each sacrifice I had made, each act of love had been taken, twisted, and used to pave the road to this moment, to me standing alone in the rain, locked out of my own home, discarded like a piece of trash. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. A single hot tear finally escaped and traced a path through the grime on my cheek. But then something shifted. The cold rain felt different. It was no longer just a source of misery, it was clarifying. It washed away the fog of shock and grief, and in its place a cold, hard resolve began to form. They thought I was a weak old man, a relic to be disposed of. They had forgotten who I was. I was Elijah Vance. I had worked in a steel mill for 40 years, turning raw, useless ore into something strong and unbreakable. I had faced down foremen, paid off debts, and buried the love of my life. I was a survivor, and I was a man who kept his promises. My promise to Loretta was to take care of our daughter. And I realized standing there in the downpour that sometimes taking care of someone doesn't mean protecting them from the world. Sometimes it means protecting the world from them. It means teaching them a lesson so sharp and so deep that it reshapes their very soul. I straightened my back, the pain in my joints momentarily forgotten. I was no longer grieving. I was planning. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old, sturdy flip phone. I ignored the missed calls from my sister and the text from my doctor. I scrolled through my short list of contacts, my thumb moving with a steady, deliberate purpose. It went past Nia's name without pausing. It stopped on a name she didn't even know existed. Marcus, my oldest friend, my brother from the mill. My finger pressed the call button. The small screen lit up, casting a pale blue glow on my face. A face that was no longer etched with sorrow. It was the face of a man who had just been handed a new purpose. The phone began to ring. The phone rang 3 times, each ring a sharp, piercing sound against the steady drumming of the rain on the pavement. I had walked away from the house, turning my back on the warm yellow light spilling from its windows. I was just a silhouette in the dark now, standing under the awning of a closed-down corner store, the smell of wet concrete filling the air. On the 4th ring, a familiar voice, rough as gravel but steady as a rock, answered. "Eli, you okay? It's late." It was Marcus. My voice was a low rumble, steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Marcus, it's Elijah. We have a situation. The numbers hit." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his own armchair, the one that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and motor oil, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Hit, you mean? The numbers, all of them." "All of them." I confirmed, my voice flat. "The Powerball, too. 125 million. A low whistle came through the phone, followed by a whoop of joy. "Hot damn, Eli, we did it. 15 years, we finally did it. I gotta call the boys." His excitement was a painful reminder of the joy I had felt just an hour earlier. I let him have his moment before I brought him back down to earth. "Marcus," I said, cutting through his celebration, "there's a problem. A big one. Nia and Derek, they kicked me out. They're trying to claim the whole prize for themselves." The joy in his voice vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous quiet. I explained everything. The TV announcement, the sudden change in their eyes, the deed to the house, the duffel bag thrown at my feet. I didn't embellish or add emotion. I just laid out the facts, one brutal detail after another. When I finished, the only sound was the static on the line and the rain hitting the tin roof above me. Marcus was the first person I had ever met at the steel mill 45 years ago. We had started on the same shift, 2 young men with more muscle than sense trying to build a life out of fire and iron. We had seen each other through strikes, layoffs, injuries, and the weddings of our children and the funerals of our wives. Our friendship wasn't built on pretty words. It was forged in the heat of the furnace, in the shared understanding that you always had the back of the man next to you. That shared trust was the foundation of the brotherhood of the shift. It started 15 years ago, a few years before we all retired. 12 of us, all veterans of the graveyard shift, decided to pool our money for the Powerball. It was more of a ritual than a real hope of winning. $2 a week from each man. We had a formal agreement, a simple document drafted by a nephew of one of the guys, which we all signed and had notarized. It named me as the trustee, the one to buy the ticket and manage the small bank account we had set up. It was a pact, a continuation of the bond we had formed over decades of shared labor. We trusted each other with our lives in the mill. Trusting each other with a couple of bucks a week was easy. Finally, Marcus spoke, and his voice was devoid of any of the earlier warmth. It was cold, hard steel. "That boy, Derek," he said slowly. "I never liked him. Always had the eyes of a snake. But Nia, Loretta's girl, I can't believe it." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep, steadying breath. "They picked the wrong old men to mess with Eli. They think we're just a bunch of broken-down retirees. They forgot what we used to do for a living. We spent our lives taking pressure and heat and turning it into something that could build cities." A small measure of warmth returned to my chest. I wasn't alone in the rain anymore. "What do we do, Marcus?" "First thing," he said, his voice now crisp and businesslike, "you're coming to my place. I'll put a pot of coffee on. Second, we don't call Nia. We don't call Derek. We don't say a word. We let them think they've won. And third, tomorrow morning you're going to make one more call. Not to them, not to the lottery commission. You're going to call Amani Carter." The name was vaguely familiar. "Who's that?" "James Carter's granddaughter," Marcus explained. "James was another member of our brotherhood, a quiet man who had worked the cranes. She's a lawyer. Not one of those slick billboard lawyers. The real deal. They call her a shark, but a shark is exactly what we need when there's blood in the water. I'll get you her number. Get some sleep, Eli. The work is just getting started." The next day I found myself in a world that felt a million miles away from my living room. Amani Carter's office was downtown in a sleek glass tower that seemed to scrape the sky. The lobby was all marble and polished chrome, and the silence was broken only by the soft clicking of expensive shoes. Her office wasn't what I expected. There were no dusty law books, just a large mahogany desk, 2 black leather chairs, and a massive window with a panoramic view of the city. Imani Carter herself was a force of nature. She couldn't have been much older than Nia, but she carried herself with an authority that was absolute. She was dressed in a sharp dark blue suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She moved with a quick, efficient grace, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm. Her eyes were what struck me the most. They were dark, intelligent, and missed nothing. She didn't offer condolences or waste time with small talk. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk and said, "Mr. Vance, Marcus Carter told me the basics. Now tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave out a single detail." So I did. I told her the story again, but this time it was different. Under her intense, focused gaze, the story shed its emotional weight and became a sequence of events, a collection of facts and evidence. I told her about the brotherhood of the shift, about the notarized agreement, about the small, dedicated bank account. I told her about signing the deed to my house over to Nia, about the exact words Derek had used when he threw me out. She listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. She didn't take a single note, but I knew she was recording every word in her mind. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the city below. Finally, she turned back to me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something beyond professional detachment in her eyes. It was a cold, controlled anger. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice calm and precise, "what your daughter and her husband did is morally despicable. It's a betrayal of a kind that the law has no language for." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But that's not what I'm interested in. What I am interested in is the fact that their actions are also legally catastrophic for them. They have handed us a gift." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Greed makes people stupid, Mr. Vance. And your son-in-law in particular sounds exceptionally stupid. They believe that possession of the ticket is everything. They are wrong. The ticket is merely a receipt. The real proof of ownership is the paper trail, the agreement, the pattern of behavior, and you have all of that. A sliver of hope, the first I'd felt in nearly 24 hours, began to dawn in my chest. "So we can fight them." A thin, sharp smile touched her lips. "Fight them, Mr. Vance. We are not going to fight them. We are going to let them walk into a perfectly constructed legal cage, and then we are going to lock the door behind them." She laid out the strategy, and I was struck by its elegant simplicity. "We do nothing for now," she explained. "We don't contact them. We don't alert the lottery commission yet. We let them go public. Let them hire their lawyers and their financial advisors. Let them announce their win to the world. Let them start spending money they don't have. Every arrogant interview they give, every luxury car they buy on credit is another bar on the cage they are building for themselves." She stood up and walked to the window, her back to me. "They have committed what could be argued as conspiracy to commit fraud. They have exerted undue influence to gain control of an asset, your home. And they are attempting to defraud 11 other individuals of their rightful winnings. When the time is right, we will present our evidence not to them but directly to the State Lottery Commission. We will freeze the ticket, and then we will dictate the terms of their surrender. They wanted a new life. We're going to give them one, just not the one they were expecting." She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a fierce intelligence. "So for now, Mr. Vance, you go home to Marcus's place. You rest. You let me and my team gather the evidence. We need to get the original notarized agreement, the bank statements from your joint account, and security footage from the store where you bought the ticket. Let them have their party. The bigger the celebration, the harder the fall will be." I stood up feeling taller than I had in years. The weight on my shoulders hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer my burden to carry alone. I had an army of 11 steel-working brothers at my back, and I had a shark ready to fight for us. Thank you, Ms. Carter. We're not done yet, Mr. Vance, she said, that thin smile returning. But we will be. As I walked out of her office and back into the real world, I felt the first rays of a new dawn. The storm was far from over, but now I could see the path through it. While I stayed in the quiet stillness of Marcus's guest room, the world my daughter and her husband were building was loud, garish, and broadcast for everyone to see. Imani had been right. Greed had made them not just stupid, but loud. Nia, who had always been a private person, suddenly had a social media presence. Her pages, once filled with pictures of flowers from our garden or the occasional selfie, exploded with a torrent of nauseating excess. It began the day after they threw me out. The first picture was of them standing in front of my house holding champagne flutes with a caption that read, "Cheers to our new life. Big things coming. My house." They called it theirs without a hint of shame. A knot of cold fury tightened in my gut, but I remembered Imani's words. I just watched. The next day, a picture of a brand new cherry-red convertible appeared. It was a car Derek had talked about for years, a flashy, impractical machine. He was leaning against it, wearing sunglasses and a smirk that made my fists clench. Nia was in the driver's seat, blowing a kiss at the camera. The caption, "Out with the old, in with the new, had blessed, lottery winner." It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. They were documenting their own downfall with cheerful hashtags. There were videos of them walking through a monstrous empty mansion, talking about where they would put the home theater and the wine cellar. There were pictures of them at the most expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of places Loretta and I had only ever walked past. Nia was draped in designer clothes I didn't recognize, her smile looking more strained and artificial with each post. The worst part was the party. They threw a massive lottery winners party in my backyard. My backyard where I had taught Nia to ride a bike, where Loretta's prize-winning roses still bloomed. I saw the pictures online posted by their so-called friends. Dozens of strangers were trampling the grass, spilling drinks on the patio I had built with my own 2 hands. Nia and Derek stood in the middle of it all, raising their glasses, basking in the glow of money that wasn't theirs. They looked like royalty presiding over a kingdom of fools. Each post was a fresh stab of pain, but I forced myself to look. Imani's team was saving every image, every boastful comment, every digital receipt. "They're writing our legal arguments for us, Mr. Vance," she had said, her voice cool and satisfied over the phone. "Just be patient." Patience was something the steel mill had taught me well. While they partied, Marcus and I went to work. Our first stop was a small, unassuming branch of the local credit union. In a dusty safe deposit box that hadn't been opened in 10 years lay the heart of our case. The bank manager, a young woman with a kind smile, led us into the vault. The air was cool and still. I turned the key. Marcus turned his, and the small metal door swung open. Inside was a single thick manila envelope. My hands were steady as I lifted it out. I could feel the weight of the paper inside, the weight of 15 years of trust. We took it to a small private room. I broke the seal and slid the contents onto the table. There it was. The Brotherhood of the Shift Official Powerball Agreement. It was a simple document, just 3 pages long, typed up on an old word processor. But every detail was there. The names of the 12 founding members, the rules of the pool, the clear, unambiguous statement that all winnings would be shared equally. And at the bottom, 12 signatures, some neat, some a barely legible scrawl, all a testament to a bond forged in sweat and steel. Next to each signature was the stamp of a public notary dated a decade ago. It was perfect, ironclad. Marcus looked at the paper, then at me, and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "This," he said, tapping the document with a thick finger, "is the hammer." Our next task was to gather the nails. We went back to my new temporary home at Marcus's house and sat at his kitchen table. I logged into the online portal for our shared bank account. The Brotherhood Fund, we called it. The screen flickered to life, showing a history that was as steady and reliable as the men who had built it. For 15 years, the same pattern repeated. Every week, 11 deposits of $2 each. And every week, 1 withdrawal of $24 made with the debit card I kept in a special slot in my wallet. We printed everything. Page after page of meticulous, unwavering history. It was a digital tapestry of our loyalty. We highlighted the transfers from each member's personal account, a clear and undeniable trail of money leading from the 11 men directly into the fund used to purchase the winning ticket. It was boring, methodical work, and it was beautiful. It was the truth written in the cold, hard language of numbers. There was no emotion in the bank statements, and that's what made them so powerful. They couldn't be argued with. The final piece of the puzzle was the most crucial. We needed to prove that our money had bought that ticket. We drove to the small convenience store on the corner of Elm and 7th, the place where I had been buying our tickets every Friday for the last 5 years. The bell above the door chimed as we walked in. The owner, a man named Mr. Kim, whom I'd known for years, looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Elijah, good to see you. You want your usual numbers?" I smiled back. "Not today, David. Today I need a favor." I explained the situation, keeping my voice low. I didn't mention the amount of money, only that there was a dispute over a ticket I had bought here. His friendly expression hardened. He was a small business owner who understood the importance of honesty and trust. "These new people," he muttered, shaking his head. "No respect." He led us to a small, cluttered back office where a television monitor displayed a grid of fuzzy black and white images from his security cameras. He rewound the footage to the previous week. And there I was, a slightly stooped old man in a worn jacket. I watched myself walk up to the counter, greet Mr. Kim, and slide the Brotherhood's debit card through the machine. The camera angle was perfect. You could clearly see the card, the lottery machine, and the ticket printing out. I watched myself take the slip of paper, fold it carefully, and place it in my wallet. "Can you make a copy of this for me, David?" I asked. He nodded. "For you, Elijah, anything." He downloaded the file onto a small flash drive and handed it to me. As we left, he put a hand on my shoulder. "I hope you get what is yours," he said, his voice sincere. "Some people forget where they come from." We now had everything: the hammer, the nails, and the blueprint of the crime. The next morning, Marcus and I drove back downtown. We walked into Amani Carter's pristine office carrying a simple briefcase. Inside it held the notarized agreement, a thick stack of bank statements, and the small flash drive. We laid it all out on her large mahogany desk. She examined each piece of evidence in silence. She read every line of the agreement, her eyes sharp and focused. She scanned the bank statements, her finger tracing the unending column of $2 deposits. Finally, she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. She watched the silent, grainy video of me buying the ticket. When it was over, she looked up at us. The cold, professional mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, predatory satisfaction. It was the look of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "They are well and truly finished." She swiveled in her chair and began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was a weapon being aimed. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid-fire clicking of the keys. When she was done, she printed out a single-page letter. It was addressed not to Nia, not to Derek, but to the legal department of the State Lottery Commission. It was formal, cold, and utterly devastating. It cited the existence of a legal trust, referenced the enclosed evidence of a multi-party ownership agreement, and formally requested that any and all prize money associated with the winning ticket number be frozen immediately pending a full investigation into fraudulent claims. She signed it with a flourish, then sealed it in an envelope. She handed it to a young paralegal who had been waiting by the door. "Send this by courier," she commanded. "I want it on their desk before lunch." The young man nodded and left. Amani Carter leaned back in her chair and looked at me and Marcus. "The trap," she said, a thin, triumphant smile on her lips, "is now set. All we have to do now is wait for them to walk into it." The week that followed our meeting with Amani Carter was one of the quietest of my life. I fell into a simple routine at Marcus's house. We would wake up early, drink coffee on his porch while the sun came up, and talk about everything and nothing. We talked about old times at the mill, about our wives, about the aches and pains that come with being 70. We didn't talk about the money. We didn't have to. It was a silent, heavy presence, a storm gathering just over the horizon. We were simply waiting for the thunder to break. During the day, I helped Marcus in his garden, pulling weeds and staking his tomato plants. The simple, honest work felt good. It grounded me. My hands, which had spent a lifetime working with steel, found a familiar comfort in the soil. In the evenings we would play chess, the gentle clicking of the pieces, a soothing rhythm in the quiet house. For the first time in a very long time I felt a sense of peace. It was a strange, fragile peace, the kind you feel in the eye of a hurricane, but it was peace nonetheless. I didn't look at Nia's social media pages anymore. Imani had asked me not to. Her team was monitoring everything, and she said it was better for me to stay detached, so I waited. I trusted the plan. I trusted the sharp, intelligent woman who was now the general of our small army. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was watering Loretta's roses, which I had carefully dug up from my yard and replanted in pots on Marcus's porch. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I saw Imani Carter's name on the screen, and my heart gave a small nervous leap. I answered, my voice calm. "Mr. Vance," she said, and I could hear the smile in her tone. It was a smile as sharp as a razor. "The fish have taken the bait." She told me the whole story later that evening when Marcus and I sat in her office once again. She recounted the events with a cool, detached precision, but her eyes were alight with the thrill of the hunt. According to Imani, Nia and Derek had finally made their move. They had hired a lawyer of their own, a flashy character with a cheap suit and an overly confident smile, whose name I would learn was Barry. They had scheduled their appointment with the State Lottery Commission for that very morning. Imani painted a vivid picture for us. Nia and Derek arrived at the lottery headquarters as if they were royalty arriving at a coronation. He was in a brand new suit that was just a little too tight. She was wearing a bright, flamboyant dress and sunglasses so large they covered half her face. They weren't walking, they were striding, radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance. They had probably practiced their surprised and grateful faces in the mirror for days, ready for the press conference and the oversized check. They were greeted in the lobby not by a team of public relations people, but by a stern-faced woman in a sensible gray suit who introduced herself as the Commission's Director of Legal Affairs. She didn't smile. She led them past the brightly lit press room, down a long, quiet hallway and into a windowless conference room. Imani called it the bad news room. It was a sterile beige box, furnished with nothing but a large polished table and a dozen uncomfortable-looking chairs. The air was cold. Waiting for them inside were two other people, the director and a man she introduced as the Commission's chief counsel. There was no oversized check, there were no balloons. There was just a pitcher of water and a thick, ominous-looking legal file on the table. Imani said you could see the first flicker of confusion on their faces. This wasn't the festive, life-changing reception they had seen on TV. This felt serious. They sat down, their arrogant smiles faltering just a little. The director began, her voice a flat monotone. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Vance, Mr. Henderson. We have received your preliminary claim for the $125 million Powerball jackpot." Derek leaned forward, his confident smirk returning. "That's us," he said, puffing out his chest, "ready to get this show on the road." The director simply stared at him, her expression unchanging. She opened the file in front of her. "Unfortunately," she continued, her voice devoid of any apology, "we will not be able to process your claim at this time. As of 9 a.m. yesterday, a legal injunction was filed against this specific ticket number. The prize money has been officially frozen." Imani described the change in the room's atmosphere as instantaneous. The air crackled with a sudden, sharp tension. Naya's face, Imani said, went pale under her makeup. Derek's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of slack-jawed disbelief. "Frozen?" He stammered the word, sounding foreign on his tongue. "What do you mean, frozen? That's our ticket. We won." The Commission's lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice dry as dust. "According to the legal notice we received, there is a significant dispute of ownership. A claim has been filed on behalf of a trustee entity citing a pre-existing notarized agreement regarding the collective ownership of the ticket in question. The legal jargon was a deliberate weapon. It was designed to confuse and overwhelm them. Trustee entity, notarized agreement, collective ownership. These were concepts from a world they had never imagined existed." Derek predictably started to bluster. "What trustee? What agreement? That's nonsense. My wife's name is on the ticket. We have it right here." He started fumbling for his wallet, his movements clumsy and panicked. The director held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Sir, possession of the ticket is not the sole determinant of ownership. The claim we have received is substantial and is supported by extensive documentation. Until this legal dispute is resolved, the State Lottery Commission will not and cannot release any funds." Panic had now fully set in. Nia was silent, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes wide with fear. Derek, however, turned red with fury. He started shouting about lawsuits, about how this was a shakedown, how they were going to own the whole state by the time he was done. The commission's lawyer simply waited for him to finish his expression, one of profound boredom. When Derek finally ran out of steam, the lawyer said, "You are, of course, welcome to pursue any legal action you see fit. I would advise you to speak with your legal counsel. This meeting is over." Imani said that the image of them scrambling to call their lawyer Barry was almost comical. Derek's hands were shaking so much he could barely dial the number. He put the phone on speaker, a foolish, desperate move. Barry's voice, slick and overconfident, filled the cold, quiet room. After Derek's panicked explanation, Barry just laughed. "Don't you worry about a thing," his voice boomed. "This is just a classic nuisance claim. Some old fool trying to get a piece of the pie. We'll have this cleared up in no time. Just a shakedown. We'll countersue them into oblivion." The commission's lawyer Imani told us just raised an eyebrow and shared a brief knowing look with the director. In that moment they knew exactly what kind of amateurs they were dealing with. The call ended. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. The $125 million they had tasted, the life they had already started to live, was slipping through their fingers like sand. They were no longer lottery winners. They were defendants in a legal battle they didn't even understand. A formal meeting was scheduled for the following week, a meeting between all parties, between their lawyer and ours. I looked at Imani, her face calm and composed as she finished her story. The cage was built, the bait had been taken, and the door had just slammed shut. The real showdown was about to begin. The conference room was on the top floor of the building, a glass-walled box that seemed to float above the city. The table was a single, massive slab of dark polished wood, so glossy it reflected the gray, overcast sky like a black mirror. On our side sat myself, Marcus, and Imani Carter. Marcus, in his Sunday best, looked as solid and unmovable as a mountain. Imani was the picture of calm, controlled power, a single thick file resting on the table in front of her. She was perfectly still, a predator waiting for the prey to come to her. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, heavy sadness. I looked at my hands resting on the cool surface of the table. They were the hands of a man who had worked his entire life calloused and scarred. They had held my wife, rocked my daughter to sleep, and built a home. Now they were here to dismantle a lie. The door opened, and they walked in. Their lawyer, Barry, led the way. He was exactly as Imani had described him, a cheap suit trying to look expensive, a gold watch that was a little too big, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He oozed a false, greasy confidence. He strutted into the room, his briefcase swinging, and gave us a condescending nod. Behind him came Derek and Nia. Derek had his chest puffed out, trying to project an air of righteous indignation, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. He couldn't quite meet my gaze. Then I saw my daughter. My heart gave a painful lurch. She looked small. The fancy dress she wore seemed to swallow her whole. Her face was pale. Her eyes were shadowed with a fear she was trying desperately to hide. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl who used to run to me when she was scared. Then she looked at Derek, and the mask of defiance snapped back into place. They took their seats opposite us. The vast expanse of polished wood between us felt like a chasm, a canyon carved by betrayal. Barry started without any preamble, his voice loud and performative as if he were arguing in front of a jury. "All right, let's cut to the chase," he began, gesturing dismissively towards us. "My clients Nia Vance and Derek Henderson are the rightful and sole owners of a winning Powerball ticket. We are here today as a courtesy to put an end to this ridiculous, baseless claim. Frankly, it's an embarrassment." He leaned forward, pointing a finger at me. "Mr. Vance, while we appreciate that you may feel entitled to some of your daughter's good fortune, that feeling does not create a legal reality. The fact is simple. The fact is indisputable. Ms. Vance's name is on the ticket. She is the legal owner. End of story. This claim of a brotherhood," he chuckled, a patronizing, ugly sound. "It's a pathetic, transparent attempt to extort money from a loving daughter. We are prepared to offer you a small one-time settlement to make this go away out of the goodness of my clients' hearts. Take it, or we will see you in court, where we will not only win, but we will sue you for malicious prosecution." He sat back, a smug look on his face as if he had just delivered a fatal blow. He looked at Nia and Derek, who were puffing up with renewed confidence. Throughout his entire speech, Imani Carter had remained perfectly still, her hands resting on the closed file in front of her. She had let him talk, let him build his own gallows. When he finally fell silent, she didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch out, let his arrogant words hang in the air and rot. Then she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she opened the file. "Thank you for your assessment, Mr. Barry," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge of cold steel. "Now allow me to present you with the actual legal reality." She slid a document across the polished table. It was the original notarized agreement for the Brotherhood of the Shift. "This," she said, her voice rising just enough to command the room, "is a legally binding partnership agreement signed and notarized 10 years ago by 12 individuals. It establishes a formal, albeit unincorporated trust. It explicitly states that all lottery winnings purchased through the trust's funds are the collective property of all 12 members to be shared equally." Barry picked it up, his confident expression faltering as he saw the signatures the notary's stamp. Derek leaned over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the page, his face growing paler with every word he read. Imani continued, her voice relentless. "The ticket in question was not purchased by a private individual. It was purchased by Mr. Vance in his capacity as the designated trustee of this entity. Therefore, the ticket does not belong to an individual. It belongs to the trust. Your client's name on the front of the ticket is legally irrelevant when faced with a prior notarized document proving collective ownership. She was merely holding it on behalf of the trust." The color was draining from Derek's face. He looked at Nia, who was staring at the document as if it were a venomous snake. Their confidence was beginning to crumble, replaced by the first chilling whisper of doubt. Imani didn't give them time to recover. She slid a second, much thicker stack of papers across the table. "This," she said, her voice even colder, "is the complete banking history of the trust's dedicated account stretching back 15 years. As you can see, it shows a clear, unbroken pattern of deposits from 11 members and a corresponding weekly withdrawal used to purchase the tickets." She then turned her laptop around to face them. She clicked a file, and the grainy, black-and-white security footage from Mr. Kim's store filled the screen. We all watched the silent movie of me at the counter, the Brotherhood's debit card sliding through the machine, the winning ticket printing out. "And this," Imani said, "is video evidence of the trust's funds being used to purchase the specific winning ticket at the exact time and location it was sold. What you have here, Mr. Barry, is not a simple ownership dispute. What your clients have attempted to do is to defraud 11 individuals of their rightful property. That is a felony." The word felony hung in the air like smoke. Barry, the slick lawyer, was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Derek was breathing heavily, his face a mask of rage and panic. He looked cornered like a rat in a trap. But Imani wasn't finished. She had laid the legal foundation. Now came the final brutal stroke. "But beyond the fraud," she said, her voice now filled with a quiet, righteous anger, "there is the matter of intent, of character." She clicked another file on her laptop. The screen changed. It now showed a gallery of images, Nia's social media posts. There they were, smiling in front of my house. There was Derek preening against the red convertible. There were pictures from their lavish party strangers drinking in my backyard. There were screenshots of the deposits they had put down on a new mansion, of the receipts for designer clothes, all dated in the days after they had thrown me out. While the other members of this trust, Imani said, her voice low and powerful, men in their 70s and 80s, men who live on small pensions after a lifetime of hard labor, were waiting patiently. Your clients were on a spending spree. They were spending money that did not belong to them. This isn't just evidence of intent to defraud, Mr. Barry. This is evidence of a profound and staggering disrespect, a breathtaking level of greed. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer. Nia finally broke. A sob escaped her lips. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Derek just stared at the screen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The images of his own arrogance were condemning him. The legal arguments were over. Imani had taken their world apart piece by piece. Now it was my turn. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. I looked directly at my daughter, forcing her to lower her hands and meet my eyes. Her face was streaked with tears, but I could see no real remorse there. Only fear. I spoke, and my voice was not the voice of a weak old man. It was the voice of her father. It was calm, heavy, and carried the weight of a broken heart and a lifetime of broken promises. "Daughter," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "did you at least read whose name is on this lottery ticket?" She looked at me confused, her breath catching in a sob. It's my name," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is on it." I slowly shook my head. The final piece of the trap was about to spring. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You read your name. You didn't read the fine print on the back. You were so blinded by the numbers on the front you never even thought to turn it over." I reached into my own wallet and pulled out a photocopy of the back of the ticket. I slid it across the table. I signed it Nia, the moment I bought it, right there on the signature line. They all leaned in to look, and there in my steady, familiar handwriting were the words, "Elijah Vance, trustee for the Brotherhood of the Shift." "Your name on the front was just for holding it, Nia," I said, the sadness of it all finally washing over me. "I put it there because I trusted you. I was on my way to put it in the safe deposit box the next day. I trusted you with everything." That was it, the final blow. It wasn't a legal argument, it was a statement of fact, a statement of my trust and her absolute betrayal of it. The collapse was total. Barry the lawyer just sank back in his chair, his face ashen. He knew he was beaten utterly and completely. Derek slammed his fist on the table, a pathetic, impotent gesture of a man who had lost everything and knew it was his own fault. And Nia, she just stared at the photocopy at my signature. A low, guttural wail escaped her throat, the sound of a soul shattering. She had been so sure of her victory, so wrapped up in her greed, that she had overlooked the simplest, most fundamental detail. She had been so busy planning her new life that she never stopped to consider the old one she was destroying. They hadn't just lost the money, they had lost everything. And in the cold, quiet conference room high above the city, they finally understood that. The silence that fell in the room was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of utter and complete devastation. Nia's wail had subsided into a series of ragged, broken sobs. She was hunched over the table, her face buried in her hands, her expensive dress looking like a costume on a broken doll. Derek sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He stared at the photocopy of the ticket's signature line as if he could burn a hole through it with his eyes. Their lawyer Barry looked like a man who had just witnessed a car crash. He was pale, sweating, and for the first time since he had walked in, utterly silent. Imani Carter let the silence hang in the air for a full minute, allowing the weight of their defeat to settle into their bones. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, clinical, and completely devoid of triumph. She was no longer a shark. She was a surgeon preparing to make the final clean incision. "Now," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet misery, "we come to the matter of what happens next. As I see it, your clients have two available paths. I suggest you listen very carefully." She folded her hands on top of the file, her gaze fixed on Barry, but her words were for Nia and Derek. "Option 1, she began, "is the path of reason. Your clients will sign a legally binding document right here, right now, acknowledging the legitimacy of the Brotherhood of the Shift's claim. They will publicly state that this was all a profound misunderstanding. They will formally relinquish the lottery ticket to its rightful trustee, Mr. Vance. In return for this full and immediate cooperation, the trust will agree not to pursue criminal charges for fraud. Mr. Vance will receive his 1/12th share of the winnings, and what he chooses to do with that share will be his decision and his alone." She paused, letting the offer settle. It was a lifeline, a chance to escape the inferno they had created for themselves. Then she outlined the alternative. "Option 2, she said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming even colder, "is the path of consequence. You can choose to fight this. You will be facing not one but 11 separate civil lawsuits for the recovery of assets. Simultaneously, I will forward this entire file to the district attorney's office with a recommendation to pursue criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud and theft by deception. Your client's recent extravagant purchases will be presented as evidence of intent. Their assets will be frozen. They will likely face jail time. And in the end, after all the legal fees and the public humiliation they will lose, they will be left with nothing but a criminal record and a mountain of debt. The choice is yours." Barry, their lawyer, finally found his voice. It was a hoarse whisper, He leaned over and spoke to Derek and Nia, his words urgent and desperate. "Take the deal. For God's sake, take the deal. There's no way to win this. They have everything. You have to take the deal." Derek, however, had one last flicker of defiance. He shot up from his chair, his face puce with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this," he spat, his voice cracking. "You old man, you couldn't just let us be happy. You had to ruin it." Before I could even respond, Marcus stood up. He didn't say a word. He was a big man, and he just stood to his full height, his arms crossed over his chest, and stared Derek down. The rage in Derek's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a primal fear. He sank back into his chair, a deflated balloon of a man. He was a bully, and like all bullies, he was a coward at heart. All eyes turned to Nia. This was her decision to make. Her father or her future, her integrity or her ruin. She slowly lifted her head, her face a mess of smeared makeup and tears. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the daughter I once knew. I saw a hint of shame, a glimmer of regret. But it was swallowed just as quickly by the raw, bitter poison of her loss. She knew she had no choice. She looked at her lawyer and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was done. Amani was ruthlessly efficient. She produced a pre-written settlement document from her file. It was a confession and a surrender, all written in dense, unforgiving legalese. She placed it in front of Nia along with a pen. "Sign here," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. With a hand that trembled so violently she could barely hold the pen, Nia signed her name. Her signature, once so neat and confident, was a jagged, broken line. Derek signed after her, his hand moving in a quick, angry scrawl. Then came the final act of their surrender. "The ticket," Amani said softly. Nia reached into her expensive purse and pulled out the small slip of paper. The $125 million ticket. It looked so ordinary, so insignificant. It had been an object of dreams, then a weapon, and now it was just evidence of their shame. She held it in her hand for a long moment, staring at it. Then she pushed it across the vast, polished table towards me. She couldn't bring herself to look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the glossy surface of the wood. The ticket slid to a stop just in front of my hands. I looked at it. Then I looked at my daughter. There was no triumph in me, no joy, only a vast, cavernous sadness. This was a victory that felt exactly like a funeral. I had won back our money, but I had lost my child. I picked up the ticket and handed it to Imani, who placed it carefully into a new, clean envelope. Imani stood up. "This concludes our business," she said. "A copy of the signed agreement will be forwarded to your lawyer. We will handle the rest with the Lottery Commission. You are free to go." They stood up like zombies, their movements stiff and robotic. Barry practically ran out of the room, eager to escape the scene of his own professional humiliation. Derek grabbed Nia's arm and pulled her towards the door, not looking back. Just before she stepped out of the room, Nia paused. She glanced over her shoulder at me. Her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of shame, hatred, and a desperate unspoken question. I had no answer for her. I just met her gaze, my own face, a mask of sorrow. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving us in a profound and heavy silence. The story broke a few days later, but it wasn't the one Nia and Derek had dreamed of. The local news didn't tell a tale of a lucky young couple. Instead, they told the story of the Brotherhood of the Shift. They ran a picture of the 12 of us standing in front of the old steel mill, a group of smiling gray-haired men in worn work jackets. The headline read, "15 years of friendship pays off for retired steelworkers." The article celebrated our loyalty, our friendship, our shared history. It was a heartwarming, feel-good story that the city embraced. We were local heroes for a week. As for Nia and Derek, they were reduced to a single vague sentence. The prize was claimed by the trust after a brief ownership dispute was amicably resolved. They weren't villains. They were worse. They were a footnote. They had been completely and totally erased from the story. Their desperate grasp for fame had left them with nothing but obscurity. The money came a few weeks later. The number that appeared in my bank account was staggering, a figure so large it seemed unreal. But I felt no rush of excitement. I just looked at it and felt a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't a prize. It was a tool. It was a test. I didn't buy a new house. I didn't buy a fancy car. I stayed at Marcus's place, sleeping in his quiet guest room while I met with financial planners and lawyers. I knew exactly what I had to do. The money was tainted by my daughter's betrayal, and I knew I could never find peace in spending it on myself. But I could use it to wash away the stain. I could turn it into something clean, something worthy of the woman whose memory I cherished more than anything. The final scene of my story took place 6 months later on a bright sunny afternoon. I was standing on a small makeshift stage in the middle of a park in my old neighborhood. A crowd had gathered. Friends, neighbors, local leaders, and families I had never met. Behind me was a large banner that read "Groundbreaking Ceremony for the Loretta Vance Community Center." I had used every single penny of my share to create the Loretta Vance Foundation. Its mission was simple: to give others the chances my own daughter had thrown away. It would provide scholarships for underprivileged kids and grants for single parents who were struggling to make ends meet. It was the only way I knew how to honor my wife. Her love had always been about building people up, not about accumulating things. I stood at the podium, my hands resting on the worn wooden surface. I spoke about Loretta, about her kindness, her strength, her belief in community. I spoke about the importance of keeping promises. As I looked out at the crowd, at the hopeful faces of the people, my wife's legacy would now help my eyes scan the edge of the gathering. And then I saw her. Nia was standing at the very back, partially hidden by the shade of an old oak tree. She was alone. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a slump in her shoulders that spoke of a deep and heavy burden. Her face was thin and her eyes were filled with a raw, undeniable regret. She wasn't looking at me with hatred anymore. She was just watching a ghost at a feast she had been meant to co-host. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl. The anger had long since faded, leaving only a deep, aching sorrow for the daughter I had lost. I held her gaze for a long moment, and then I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't an invitation, it was just an acknowledgement that she was there, that she was part of this story, even if her role was a tragic one. The door to my heart was not completely closed, but the long walk back to it was one she would have to make entirely on her own. She held my gaze for a second longer, then turned and quietly walked away. After the speeches were done and the first shovel of dirt had been turned, I stood alone by the large plaque that bore Loretta's smiling face. The sun was warm on my back. The sound of children playing in the park was a kind of music. I finally felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I thought I might never feel again. I looked up at the clear blue sky as if I could see her looking down at me. "Money can buy a house," I whispered to the quiet air, "but it can never build a home. A real legacy isn't what you leave for people, it's what you build inside of them." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree. I had kept my promise. I had taken care of our girl in the only way I had left, and I had taken care of our community. My work was done. I kept my promise, Loretta. I said, a final quiet smile touching my lips. "You can rest now." This whole ordeal taught me something profound. Money is like a floodlight. It doesn't change what's there, it just illuminates what was already hiding in the shadows. It revealed the greed in my daughter's heart, but it also revealed the unshakable loyalty of my friends. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the promises you keep and the community you build. A man's real legacy is not the fortune he leaves behind, but the integrity he lives by. And that is a treasure no one can ever take away from you. What would you have done in my situation? Do you believe a relationship can be repaired after such a deep betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please show your support by liking this video and subscribing for more stories.